On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, one of America's leading urban public libraries, delivering exceptional services and programs with a mission to improve lives and build a stronger community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
What I've seen over and over and over and over is how desperate we are just to walk through this life unencumbered from the head trash that we tell ourselves about how we're not enough. I think that's the deepest part of it. So I think that's what we want, is just to be able to be free with each other. And I really think that we all just want to live a really good life, a rich life that has contribution. And when we're really constrained, it's hard to contribute in a way that feels like, yeah, that's it. This is it. This is what I'm here for.
Laura Neff is an organizational transformation and leadership development consultant and coach for Dorrier Underwood, an organizational and executive development consulting firm. Before joining Dorrier Underwood in 2016, Laura founded and led many entrepreneurial ventures, including her own practice as an executive coach for emerging leaders for 10 years, co-founding Nourish LLC, an organic vegan meal delivery service, and launching Cresswell Communications, a strategic communications and training firm. Her career began at NationsBank, Bank of America, where she was Vice President, Technology and Operations, Strategic Internal Communications. She is a past president of the International Coach Federation, Charlotte Chapter. In this episode, we explore executive and personal coaching, what makes a good life coach, speaking people into themselves, and the journey we are all on. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Laura, welcome.
Thank you.
Laura, you have done so many things and have had a remarkable career. I'd like to start with the work you are doing now. Tell me about Dorrier Underwood.
Dorrier Underwood is a leadership and organizational transformation firm. We are 9 people strong. Our consultants span from Cincinnati to Atlanta. We work with clients all over the country and sometimes overseas. And we go to work on the life of an organization. So we work with the human beings in an organization to have people be fully honored. We believe that organizations, like the structure of a company, of an organization, is an opportunity to have life go better for the human beings that make up that organization. And therefore, when the human beings that make up an organization are happier, are fully responsible for what they bring to the workplace, are pulling for one another's success, are getting that they create the culture, then everything related to the work can go faster and can be actually more than anybody can think it can be.
And how does Dorrier Underwood go about that work?
So the first thing we do is we build relationship with a leadership champion. We call them leadership champions, who is going to be the biggest supporter of our work in a company. And we work with that person to understand what's the vision of this place. Our sweet spot is working with organizations that have a vision that's way bigger than they are, than they even know how to achieve, and that may outlast their lifetime. So we get a real sense of what that vision is. And sometimes that's where we start our work, because sometimes the vision's too small and you can tell right away. So sometimes we get in there with that person to expand the vision, and maybe with their team as well. So that's job one. It's like, what's the vision? Job two is, what has us in this conversation that's not happening in service of that vision? So we create a set of outcomes that are very clear about what needs to happen with the human beings who are going to make that vision actually reality so that they can get there. And then we come in and we start talking to people in the company. We take a cross-section of individuals across the organization that we're going to be working with, and we ask questions like, what's it like around here? What's it like when you walk in the door? How do conversations happen? Do you feel empowered? What's an example of that? Where do you feel disempowered? We get a real sense of what's happening in the space of the life of the company. And then we go to work on consulting, coaching. We work with teams when they're in action together doing their work. We'll do workshops. We do large group workshops. We do workshops and retreats with leadership teams. And we stay as long as we need to get the job done.
What attracted you to coaching?
Oh, normally I have this conversation with people over a glass of wine because it's a nice long one if we let it be. What attracted me to coaching was that I saw in the first 10 or so years of my work life, which was pretty varied, that the moments that were real highlights for me were when I was doing the work of helping people discover who they were that they couldn't have seen on their own. And it was such an honor. Like, those are the moments that lit me up. Like, I used to, when I worked at Bank of America, I had an opportunity at one point to lead part of the Franklin Covey life management piece. And I would get these guys who were, had been working at the bank, maybe in operations in check processing or something for 30 years. And they came to this workshop on time and life management. And they would sit down outside of their normal routine and they would stop and they would look at, what do they value the most? They would look at, how are they spending their life? How are they spending their days? How are they spending their moments? And for the first time, they would get the chasm between those two. And they would sit there with tears rolling down their face. And I was like some young punk. I was like 28. And I would sit there. I would just stand there like in awe of how much of an honor it felt like to actually be the one that was helping them look and see.
It seems everyone is a life coach these days. What do you make of that?
Couple things. One is, coaching is, well, I could say a couple things about that. First of all, it's really gratifying work. It's really gratifying work. When you love life and you love possibility and potential, and you've had a breakthrough or two on your own in your own life, man, there's nothing like supporting somebody else, getting to a new place, having their shoulders back, their chin up, taking deep breaths, striding through their life in a new way with a newer sense of purpose. There's nothing like it. So I think it's really attractive from that sense. On a really practical note, coaching is an unregulated industry. You can become a quote unquote certified coach in a weekend if you want to. Anybody can, you don't even have to do that. Anybody can just hang a shingle out. They can tack it to the end of whatever else they say they do. And it can be attractive to people who want more out of their life to go talk to somebody like that. So it's really like the bar for entry is pretty low. So I think that has brought a lot of people to it.
How do you know a good coach when you meet one?
When you meet a good coach, they're going to have a lot of people that you could talk to who can speak to the work they do firsthand and the kind of support that they were able to get by working with that person. A good coach when they can talk to you very clearly about the difference between coaching and therapy and how they know to toe that line responsibly. A good coach, maybe not everybody would agree with this, but to me, a good coach when they are associated with the International Coach Federation, because that is the kind of worldwide body that holds a code of ethics and a standard of ethics that you have to agree to be a member of the International Coach Federation. I think these days, this isn't the only way to know a good coach, but if a coach has been in business for at least 5 years, if not 10 or 15, and you can talk to people that person's worked with, you probably know that's a pretty good coach. One thing I would be watching for is if that person is asking more questions than telling. So a lot of people have confusion around what coaching is, that a coach is going to be someone who tells me how to do my life better. And that is not what a good coach does. A good coach asks questions that has their client look for themselves and see for themselves what the next step is. And a good coach is someone who holds people accountable. So when I meet a new coach, I'm wanting to get a sense that this is a person who has a strength of character, because that's what it takes to hold someone accountable for what they say they want, especially when they're trying to squirm out of it because they get scared.
How is the business leadership coaching you are doing now different than the personal coaching you did for many years?
I would say the biggest difference is that although the conversation with someone in an organization who's an executive or leader, it may be a personal conversation. It may be, how is this way you're showing up at work affecting you in your life? And then how is that affecting your sense of well-being so that when you come back to work tomorrow, you are resourced and have things to give, right? So the conversation sometimes might look the same, but in business coaching, it's always going to be in the context of who are you being for this company? Who are you being for your team? How are you able to show up, and what are the business results that you want to create through your leadership?
Well, I have some coaching questions for you, Laura.
Oh, goody.
When are you totally lit up? When are you most happy and in flow?
I am most happy and in flow when one time that I am most happy and in flow is when I am active physically with people I love who are pushing me hard, and especially if we're doing that outside, and especially if we're doing that off the ground, up in the air.
And what's going on with you when you are lit up?
I am not thinking about anything else than where I am, what I'm doing, who I'm with, and sometimes why I'm there.
And when are you most angry or uncomfortable?
Such a great Mark Paris question. I am, so something that I have not yet really pushed into that makes me more angry than anything, like so angry I can barely talk about it, is when animals are abused. And like if I drive by a dog that's in a tiny pen or on a chain or something, and the weather's bad and they don't have a bowl of water, and that I can't abide. I can't handle it when animals that don't have a voice of their own are being abused and mistreated. I think that, I watch children with animals, and there seems to me to be such an innate, natural connection between little kids and animals. They're so, and I was this way when I was a little girl. I was so drawn to creatures of the earth, fascinated with them, and they're so easy to love because there's no junk in the way, like there gets in the way with people. It's so pure. And I think that's why we grieve our animals, the loss of our animals, so much, is that relationship is so pure, and it is a space of unconditional love from the animal to the person. And I think for me as a little kid, so I was the youngest. I'm the youngest of 7, and I had a lot of time by myself when I was a little girl, and we had a little farm, and our animals were, that's who I hung out with, So for me, a relationship with an animal is it's like the purest form of companionship, and it's so beautiful, and it breaks my heart that people don't see that and have that.
What's the deepest story you carry about yourself?
That's a great question. I would say the deepest story I carry about myself is that I totally belong and I can never belong. So the genesis of that for me is that my family, the way I always describe my family is Brady Bunch +1, and I'm the +1. So mom and dad each had 3 kids from their first marriages, and then they got married and they had me. And there's a 6-year gap between me and my next sibling, which is my sister. And growing up, I was always aware that they all had a life before me. They had even lives as sibling groups before each other. And yet I felt surrounded by family and love, and I know I was so cherished, and I was always told that I was the glue that held it all together. So there was always a deep sense of belonging, but at the same time, I always felt like I was on the outside.
And how does that story of I always belong but never belong serve you? Why are you attached to that story?
I think it gives me, in one way, it gives me a certain sense of freedom. Like I don't really have to belong, so I can do whatever I want. I can go wherever I want next. Maybe sometimes I can avoid certain conversations because I don't really belong here, so that's okay. And at the same time, in the belonging sense of the story, I love walking around the world meeting people. I don't ever question my ability to connect with another human being, which is, I don't take that for granted. You said to me one time that the first word you use to describe yourself is citizen. And I've thought about that a lot. And I think there's a way that you define that might be different than how I do. But when it comes to being a citizen of humanity, of the world, I'm grateful for an innate sense of belonging.
Is there another story that would serve you better?
No. Let's see. Maybe. And this is the one I've got. And where it came from is something I would never change. So maybe I'll live into another story, but for right now, it's such a rich terrain to be aware of this story and see how it shows up and work with it and be curious about it and be watchful for where it slows me down and keeps me from where I want to get to next, wherever that is, and also where it can create something totally unpredictable and amazing.
Laura, you mentioned your family life.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up on a very small family farm on the outskirts of Geneva, New York, which is right in the heart of the Finger Lakes in the western arm of New York State. What
was that life like?
It was wonderful. It really was. I was, you could say I was the typical 70s and 80s latchkey kid, but I loved it. I would come home every day after school and grab a snack, and most days I would get my dog, and we had acres and acres of land behind our house, and some of that land was apple orchards, some of it was woods. There was a pond, there was a stream with a little bridge over it that was mysterious to me because someone long before I was alive built it, and it was forgotten, and you had to kind of climb through the trees in the woods to even find it. And I loved that I knew it was there, and so I would just ramble. And I would make believe, and I would find hidden grapevines that nobody else knew were there and bring home a big basket of grapes for my family and love the fact that no one knew where they came from except for me. We had a couple cows, a bunch of chickens. Sometimes we had a couple pigs, and I would go out. And when I was really little, my mother loves to tell the story that when I was really little, I would take my little golden book, those little golden books that kids read, and I would go out into the hen house with an apple, and I would sit on the bottom rung of the roost and I would read to the chickens and they would all gather around. I thought because they loved the story, but really it was because they wanted to peck my apple, which I would let them do. I would share my apple. So it was pretty delightful in my memory.
Tell me about your mom and dad.
My mom and dad met while they were each playing lead roles in Guys and Dolls. And they, through the telling of that story, through their characters, which is a story of two people falling in love, they fell in love. And so I was the product of that. And my dad was a third-generation dairy farmer. So that was his grounding, very much in the natural world, and he gave me all of that he could. My mom is an incredible nurturer, and she is someone I really respect for being in relationship. She has been intentionally in relationship, which sounds weird to say, but like all her life. She gave up a lot for us to have what we needed, and she worked so hard throughout our whole childhood. My parents owned a flower shop and nursery for several years. My mom ran the flower shop, and she's got incredible creativity. They did that together.
When you think about your parents, what did they teach you?
Well, my dad taught me to never, ever, 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 ever be late paying a bill. Very practical. He's in my head every month. They taught me to tell my husband I love him every day. They taught me to not be shy about demonstrating my love for him in front of other people every day. They taught me what it takes to hold a family together. My dad taught me about the natural rhythm of life from nature, and to appreciate it, and to open my eyes and look around and see what's around me, like really see what's around me. He taught me how to love the feeling of sun-warmed dirt in my fingers, and to revel in planting a seed and watching it grow and harvesting fruit from it. My mom taught me about being silly. We had a really big garden when I was growing up, and oftentimes when I was young, especially, it was like a family job to, say, harvest the tomatoes, and Mom would make tomato sauce and stewed tomatoes and homemade ketchup, and it was like a day-long big event that everybody had to contribute to. But often she and I would end up being the ones in the kitchen, and we would make up hilarious, silly songs about like blanching tomatoes. And we made this whole song about Blanche, and we were just really silly. She is the harbinger of silly in our family, especially for the women for some reason. And I can see that playing out now in my nieces, which is amazing.
Laura, who were you in high school?
In high school, I was someone who was really grappling with feeling like I had to let go of who I really was in order to fit in and be who I thought everybody else wanted me to be. So I had this experience actually pre-high school, walking through the threshold of Mrs. Perry's 6th grade classroom on the first day of middle school. And we had 2 elementary schools that poured into one middle school, so there were half the room of kids I didn't know. And there was this grouping of kids sitting at a table together who were the in-town kids. And I didn't even know I had a concept of in-town kids until that moment. But, I came from living on the outskirts of town, mostly playing by myself a lot, being a kind of a farm kid that liked to climb trees and, make believe out in nature with my dog. That was like my world. I walked into Mrs. Perry's 6th grade classroom, and here's this group of kids that were wearing polo shirts with the collars up, and girls had makeup on and fancy earrings, and they were talking to boys. Oh my gosh. But they had this whole life that they had in town together ever since they were kids, and this like grouping of children. And I got in that moment like, whoa, there's a whole world that I do not know anything about. And the part that I really also remember is that when I walked in, of course, everybody looks to see who's walking in the door, who's in our class. And in my memory, whether it actually went like this or not, but in my memory, especially the girls, looked over, looked at me, looked me up and down, and turned away and totally dismissed me. And I think in that moment, I decided I never wanted to feel that way again. So when I got to high school, I worked really hard. I really actually worked really hard to get into the in crowd. And to do that, I think I decided that I had to leave behind the outdoor, nature-loving, rambling little girl I had been. I had to leave behind the really sweet friendships that I had cultivated earlier. So I really struggled with kind of who I was before and who I thought I should be and who my ego was telling me I wanted to be.
You went to State University of New York in Fredonia. What was that time like for you?
In one sense, academically, it was pretty wonderful. I was an English major from day one, and often found myself taking junior, senior level classes because I just wanted it. I was so hungry for the curriculum and so hungry for the literature and the discussion. And in another sense, socially, it felt like 10th grade all over again. Really, there was a group of girls right around the corner in my dorm, and they were so cool and they had so much fun, and man, did I want to be their friend. And so it was that sense of desperately wanting to be accepted and feeling like I was on the outside, but damn it, I was going to make it into that group. And then once I got there, always feeling some level of insecurity that any second now they're going to decide that I shouldn't be here.
What do you think that fear of not being accepted was all about?
It was about desperately trying to avoid the feeling of being lonely in the midst of community and feeling alone with people all around me.
You did transfer to James Madison University. What brought you to Virginia?
When I was late in my high school years, my older sister married someone who lived just outside of Harrisonburg, Virginia, where James Madison is. And as I went through my first 2 years at SUNY Fredonia as an English major, my sister was very much involved in the community and started learning more and more about JMU and saw that they had an outstanding English department and curriculum. And so she started talking to me about that. And by the second semester, sophomore year, I had kind of peaked out in the upper level classes that I really was excited about at Fredonia. And so I looked at the curriculum, and I mean, the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia is so beautiful. It's a small town, which I was comfortable with because I'd grown up in a small town. So I just went for it, and I got accepted.
Mm-hmm. Laura, when did you begin to find your way back to yourself?
I would say that actually happened when I left my corporate job. When I really got that although I loved the work, the lifestyle of spending my days in a corporate tower was just way too far removed from the ground. And there was, when I left, so I started working at NationsBank when I moved to Charlotte in 1993, and while I was there, became Bank of America. And it went really well for me. The work was work I could do easily and well, and I loved the challenge of it, and I was getting promotions and raises, and each one started feeling more and more hollow, and like it didn't do anything for me after a while, and I would find myself standing at the window of my office looking down, stories and stories down to the street, and seeing all these cars and people out in the world at 2:00 on a Tuesday. And my life was so, get in the office by 8, leave at 5 or 6, and you just stayed in the office world. Or you might go down for lunch and then come back up to the office, and I would just stand there with my forehead pressed against the window looking down to the street and thinking, what are those people doing in their lives that has them able to be driving around Charlotte at 2:00 on a Tuesday? Like, I want that. I want more of that. And I want to, I'd see people walking around in the street, and it would just make me think, like, what am I really doing? What am I affecting? How am I really having an impact on human beings doing the work I'm doing? And the answer really was maybe a little, but that became less and less of enough. I wanted to be able to have impact with human beings with their feet on the ground down on the street.
Laura, in 1998, you left the bank and started your own communications company.
I did. It felt like a big break. It was like, I'm leaving the bank, capital L, capital T, capital B. And the funny thing was that, so I did consulting and contracting work, internal strategic communications, and a year or so into that work, which was wonderful, it gave me a sense of freedom. I could work from home. I could go to yoga at 2:00 on a Tuesday and be driving around town instead of in an office tower. And what I got was that a little ways into it was I was doing the same work with the same people, and it wasn't filling my soul. It was just different window dressing around me. So that lasted for a couple of years. It was incredible financially. It helped me stretch into a sense of freedom for myself, but then I saw that the next piece was the actual work I was doing being more fulfilling. So also in there, what you don't know is that in between leaving the bank and starting Cresswell Communications, I went back to school, started pursuing a graduate degree in English, and I got halfway through, and thanks to some good conversation with some people wiser than me, realized that pursuing that to completion was not the right path for me, but I had actually gone far enough into the curriculum and taken some courses on teaching college English that they actually invited me back to be adjunct faculty. So I got to teach freshman and sophomore kids coming into UNCC, and it became a playground for me of, especially the freshmen. I loved the freshman first semester because I could use these different kinds of writing that I was teaching them to have them explore more deeply what it was like to be in this transition in their life. So when I start looking back at threads that led me to coaching, that was one.
How did you meet your husband?
I met my husband in a whitewater kayaking group that used to be in Charlotte called Mecklenburg Regional Paddlers. He and I were both learning how to whitewater kayak from the same people, but at different times in different places. And I kept hearing about this guy, Rob, and he kept hearing about this woman, Laura. And one evening out at Mountain Island Lake, we met, and it was history. 3 weeks later, we were saying to each other, "You're the one, oh my gosh." And 6 weeks later after that, so 9 weeks after we met, we decided to both close our businesses that we were running and convert a school bus and travel around the country for a year. So we met in May 2001, and in February 14th, 2002, we drove out of Charlotte and toured the country. So we were on the road for 10 months, came back in December, and that whole year was incredible. Obviously, we went all over 14 states and British Columbia and followed our noses. We didn't really have a plan, and we met incredible people. So traveling in a converted school bus is a great conversation starter. So I wish I had $1 for every time someone approached the bus and said, "Can I look in here? How many of you are there?" So So yeah, we went all over the country, and I was 31 at the time and was just a couple years out of the bank and had just really gotten that, I left the bank, but I really didn't leave that kind of work. And I was just ready to be blown wide open. And that year did that for me. So when we came back, I had learned how to make jewelry while we were gone in this tiny little town in Colorado where we ended up staying for a summer, and turned that into a business. And then I ended up managing Charlotte's first retail bead store and teaching people how to make jewelry. But really what it was about for me was helping people discover that they actually were really creative, and watching them walk out beaming, holding this bracelet in their hand that they never thought they could actually make, that was just beautiful and they were so proud of. And then also that year, Robert and I, with another friend, actually this was 2003, we started Charlotte's first urban CSA, consumer-supported agriculture. So you basically buy into a share of what's harvested for the entire growing season. So we fed 17 families that year. And Lynn Caldwell, who was the first manager of the Atherton Farmers Market and had built farmers markets prior to that, actually was standing around the table at our garden talking to our partner who we did the growing with, and having this dream of surely there could be a farmers market where people are really growing the stuff in Charlotte and there's a lot of organic, and it has been so gratifying over the years to see what that seed of a conversation started. So the Atherton Farmers Market came from that moment.
In 2006, you started another company, launching your own firm as a personal coach and leadership consultant, which you did for 10 years. What did you learn about yourself during those years?
One thing I learned is that I am really good at taking people's chaos and reflecting it back to them simply and succinctly, so that it became accessible to them as something they could do something with and move forward in a really intentional way, because it had been called down out of the fray into a succinct something that made sense. So I learned that about myself. I learned that the phrase that's coming is I can speak people into themselves. So I can see who people are and say that out loud back to them. And this is where the work becomes such a privilege and an honor, and it doesn't feel like it comes from like me, the personality of Laura. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to people about who they are, who I experience them as being, and they just get quiet and sit back in their chair and they can't even speak because no one has actually said, listen, do you have any idea? Do you have any idea who you are? Here's who I experience you as. And they get it. They really get it. You could say the word that comes up is intuition, but I don't think it's like more than that. It's somehow seeing into the essence of who someone is, and that they can't touch right now because they're distracted by all the stuff, right? And being able to speak to that and help them. That's why, so my tagline for my coaching business was know yourself, lead your life. And every client, it was a non-negotiable. We spent at least 2 months doing that work of, who are you at your core? I didn't care if we did anything else past that. If they could leave my office or leave our long-distance phone coaching relationship, walking through this world knowing who they were and being able to orient their choices around that was worth everything.
How did that help you gain clarity as to who you are?
You asked me earlier about how people know a good coach when they encounter one. And part of knowing a good coach is knowing that the coach you're working with is doing their own work. Like, that's integrity in coaching to me. And it's one of the best parts of being a part of any kind of this world of work, is that if you're not walking your own talk, then you're completely out of integrity as the professional you say you are, in my opinion. So I did my own work. I worked with coaches who had a similar approach and philosophy and found my own way to myself. And I think that what I love about working with other professionals in this capacity is that I don't need anybody around me to be perfect. I just need them to be on their own path as well. Maybe a step or two ahead of me, holding the light, saying, come this way. You can find out a lot if you come this way. Watch out for that stone. Don't trip over it.
Laura, in 2011, you co-founded yet another venture, a company called Nourish.
Yes, I did. And it's one of the best things I've ever created. From my early days growing up on our little farm in New York State, almost everything we ate came from our garden or from the animals that we raised. And so I've always had a really strong orientation to vitality and well-being. So for a long time, I just have pursued a path of learning and love of growing and harvesting and cooking with great, beautiful ingredients and then serving them to people I love. It's one of my favorite things. And I had an experience that led me to really see that as much as we know about how what we put in our bodies can keep disease at bay, can have us be vital and alive and fully resourced for the rest of the work we have to do in the world, when we turn to the food system we're in, most of the time it hands us everything but what we know we should be consuming to have a great life and a long life and a healthy life. So I stomped around for a couple months like, someone should do something about that. Why isn't anybody doing anything about that? We have all these foods that are convenient, but they're probably not locally sourced, and they're probably not maybe made for you. And if they are, they're probably not organic. And so everywhere you turn, there were elements of it, but nobody had brought it all together in one package where you could very easily, with a couple clicks of a mouse button, order some food that was delivered to your doorstep, that was locally made, fresh, just for you, that was locally sourced, that's organic, that honored any kind of diets like gluten-free, processed sugar-free, etc. So Nourish is all of that. And I started it with my amazing co-founder, Julia Simon, and we had an incredible several years together. And then I saw that it was time for me to pursue the leadership development and coaching work much more fully in my life. And so she bought my half of the company, and I'm so proud of the work that she and the team have done to continue growing the business, and it's thriving and really becoming a presence in Charlotte, especially in the vegan community.
How is Dorrier Underwood helping you grow?
If there is any meaning to life in terms of like why we land different places, this business is, definitely ripping the veils off. Like part of about authenticity, part of what Nancy Dorrier is at work on for me is when I'm sitting in a meeting and there's something to say, and I'm not saying it because I'm afraid to say it, because it'll probably deep down I'm afraid of creating a break in belonging. So I just stay quiet. She is working so hard on me to, first of all, bring it past the level of, into the level of consciousness, and to open my mouth and say the thing and get that I am a contribution when I break past whatever this limitation is I have for myself, because I'm afraid it'll mean that I won't fit in anymore if I say the thing. And that was the same in high school. I'm sure that was the same in my corporate career, when I think I probably led mostly based on my ego than who I really am. And although I feel like I love my life path, I love the jumps that I've made, I love that I've done some, I think, fairly remarkable stuff, I still find myself as a 47-year-old woman in the world walking around contained because I'm afraid to fully be myself, because I'm afraid ultimately I won't belong. And that's what I really, really want, is the sense of belonging.
How is whether you belong impacting you now?
So the belonging, not belonging story, I can see has likely contributed to this path I've had of jumping from one thing to another, to another, to another, not staying. And I'm not labeling that as good or bad. And I'm curious, this is Dorrier Underwood. I entered Dorrier Underwood after 15 years of entrepreneurship. And it was the offering of a team. It was the offering of a body of work that I could sink into, that I knew would take a long time to really sink into. Our work is very deep. It's very wide. Our client work takes 2 to 3 to 4 years. So there's not a short cycle time that I could just, quickly get it and jump in and be masterful. So where I am now is a space of looking and seeing what it's like to stay and what that takes of me to be fully committed and stay. And who knows where my path will go, but right now I'm acting as if like this is it. And what that has to offer in terms of who I have to be in relationship with my colleagues and to our material and to who we say we are in the world, and showing up day after day as fully committed to that. And the same thing in marriage. I've been with my husband 17 years. We've been married for 10. And it's a blessing and a curse in my relationship with my husband to know that if something happened and our marriage exploded, which of course I don't want it to, but if it did, I know I'd be okay. I know I'd be fine. I'm very independent. And that's not what I want. I want to stay. And I want to be deeply, richly committed to this man. And that takes something that I didn't have to employ in myself, jumping from job to job to job or moving or whatever.
Laura, you were the youngest in a family of 9 people. Now you're the youngest in a company of 9 people. Do you see any connection between those two?
Gee, do you think? Could I have architected that any more perfectly for what there is to learn in this life and to what I need to get that clearly I haven't gotten yet? I don't think there's any coincidence. I didn't go into Dorrier Underwood conscious of that. I was aware that I would be the youngest. And interestingly, the people in my company have, most of them have a very long history together. And some of them a little less so, but 10 years, 15 years, 20, 25 in the company. And so I've been there 2 years, actually 2 years this month, and it took a long time. It took a long time to get that I could belong in a company where people have been together so long. For a little while, I think maybe that wasn't going to work. And part of it has been me deciding that I belong. I think when I was young, I think as kids do, right? I was waiting for cues from the outside to tell me that I belonged. And now I'm at work on claiming that I belong and seeing what that means for how I show up every day and who I am for those people. I could sit around and wait for them to, actually I couldn't, you know what? They could tell me all day long how great I am, how glad they are that I'm there, how much I belong, they never want to see me leave. And that would never fill whatever it is in me that doesn't always feel like I belong. So I think maybe what I'm learning is that I have to create belonging for myself first. And then if it comes from the outside, great. But that's what I'm exploring right now.
Laura, as you gain this clarity and declare your sense of belonging, both in the world and at home, what's possible for you?
I don't know. I've never done it before. I'm joking, sort of. Sort of joking. I think what I sense could be possible is growing more fully into myself. There's someone I've never been because I have never really planted myself And that's not to say that who I've been has been wrong in any sense at all, but there's an expression of myself that I know can come through in a whole different way when I plant myself, because that's really where I want to be. So I really can't answer your question yet, but I can feel myself growing more strong in asserting what I see to assert and not apologizing for it, seeing what there is to say and saying it and staying right there and not going immediately to my head chatter. Like that's lessening as I am planting myself with these people and saying what there is to say and contributing what I have to contribute and holding to that. So stay tuned.
Laura, you've coached hundreds of individuals who come to you with their most private and vulnerable concerns. What is the journey you think we were all on?
Being free to just be who we are. No apologies. It's such a heavy thing to carry around, this idea that I'm not enough, or that somehow I am not allowed to be me, or you, not allowed to be you. And what I've seen over and over and over and over is how desperate we are just to walk through this life unencumbered from the head trash that we tell ourselves about how we're not enough. I think that's the deepest part of it. So I think that's what we want, is just to be able to be free with each other. And I really think that we all just want to live a really good life, a rich life that has contribution. And when we're really constrained, it's hard to contribute in a way that feels like, yeah, that's it. This is it. This is what I'm here for. Because I don't want to get to the end when it could be tomorrow, but if I have the gift of having a deathbed that I'm awake for and aware of, I don't want to look back and wish that I had done it better or been stronger, or like I don't want to feel like I missed it. And I think that's a pretty common thing when we project forward and look back, and I don't want to feel like I missed it. So that makes it worth pushing through in the moment and being more unapologetically who I am and bringing uniquely what I have to bring to any conversation and not holding back.
Thanks for your time today, Laura.
Thank you, Mark.
Laura Neff is an organizational transformation and leadership development consultant and coach for Dorrier Underwood. She earned a bachelor's degree in English from James Madison University. And now, a personal word. I have never retained a personal or executive coach. I've often wondered what it would be like to have a professional coach who would help me realize greater possibilities in life. I have dug deep to know myself and to make choices true to who I am, but it's one thing to do something on your own or with friends and family. It's something else to have someone trained in the field question you and hold you accountable. I've thought once or twice of what it would be like to be a life or executive coach. I have friends who are executive coaches, and I think I could do that work well. If there is one thing I love, it's helping people unlock good lives. I have been a coach informally at every stage of my professional career, as a lawyer, counselor, consultant, advisor, and teacher. but not formally as a life or executive coach. This is all to say I am fascinated by the work and by the people who do it well. Somewhere along the line, someone told me that Laura Neff was one of the most highly regarded life coaches in Charlotte. Another friend told me that Laura and I were similar in many ways and should meet. Once Laura was across the room from me at a social event, but I wasn't able to say hello. I sent Laura a note introducing myself. We soon met at 7th Street Station in Charlotte. I had hot chocolate and not just coffee. Laura had green juice from Viva Raw, and we talked about our work. I found out that she had closed her practice and was now into her 2nd year at Dorrier Underwood. I told her about the classes I teach and the new one I was creating called How to Change the World. We talked about this podcast. We met again for lunch at Luna's Living Kitchen at Atherton Mill in Charlotte. We sat outside under an umbrella on a hot day. I had a fire and brimstone vegan burger, and Laura had an arugula harvest salad. We talked about our interests. She told me about her love for superheroes and magic and dragons. I told her about my collection of comic books. We talked about our lives. She lives on land on the outskirts of town with 3 cats, 2 dogs, and 5 chickens. I live a short walk from the main square of the city with 2 cats and a dog. The more important part was that questions probed for meaning and connection and resonance. The conversations were complex and layered and fun. Laura was someone I could imagine talking with again and again. We recorded the conversation for this podcast at my kitchen table. I often ask my guests who they were when they were young. The answer reveals something essential about them. A time when they were true to who they are. A time when something happened that set choices in motion. A time when they were unsettled before they found their way. The answer gives us a glimpse into a person's deepest story. Laura shared a memory of being a young girl on her family farm. She would explore and ramble about. One day, she discovered grapes on a hidden vine. She sensed that no one had noticed them before, or appreciated them as much as Laura did that day. She picked the grapes with wonder and delight and brought them back to her family. They enjoyed the grapes together. She is the same person today, exploring personal terrains, seeing what others might not see, and offering insights that nourish who we are. Laura also talked about belonging. She knew that her family loved her, but sensed deep relationships between her siblings that existed before her arrival on the scene. Her journey has been to belong. Belonging has 2 parts, that which belongs to us and that to which we belong. What belongs to us, we protect and honor. What we belong to is not complete without us. I think about how her professional career has been similar to mine. Laura had a corporate job that came easily and well for her, but left her unfulfilled. She did not belong. She transitioned into a consultancy of her own, but it was more of the same. She did not find her way back to herself until she became that girl who dared to ramble on. Her and her husband traveled for months on a school bus. She came back blown wide open. She found meaning helping other people discover what was true and powerful about themselves. She began ventures knowing they would not be complete without her. Until one day, she let go of a company she co-founded. Until one day, she joined a company that had deep relationships between colleagues before her arrival on the scene. The work Laura is now exploring is what it means to stay, in finding belonging in what she declares. I know that journey well, from being unfulfilled as a lawyer, to starting a company that was not much better, to founding a nonprofit organization that expressed my personality and core values, to joining a university and learning what it means to stay. I wonder if true freedom is no longer needing to belong. I wonder if true freedom is saying that you do belong. Laura Neff walks her talk. She is doing the work of self-discovery, as she is guiding others to do the same. She lives in integrity. She offers what all great coaches do. She helps us know ourselves to lead good lives. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners, and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, Art and Media Director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website, onlifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.